Cool. Yeah, so I guess we should probably begin. I think a few people are still going to join us, but yeah, so welcome everybody. This is our first ACMS speaker series, virtual speaker series, panel session. And we have Betsy and Manlai today. So Manlai and Betsy are both going to speak for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A discussion. Yeah, so we're really looking forward to it. I'm just going to go ahead and introduce both of them. Manlai is going to be presenting first, and he holds an MA in Contemporary East Asian Studies from the University of Duisburg-Essen. I probably didn't pronounce that correctly. Joining us from Germany very early in the morning. And he is interested in China's efforts and campaigns to boost its image across the world. And after that, we're going to have Betsy Gaines Quammen, who is an environmental historian studying how different cultures perceive landscape. And Betsy has done some very interesting work in the American West, as well as Mongolia for many years. She's worked in Mongolia for 8 years, and among other projects, she raised funds to rebuild the Dayan Derkh Monastery. And she's going to be speaking about that, which is in the Eg-Uur watershed and was demolished during religious purges. Okay, so I just went ahead and did both introductions right now, but yeah, again, we'll have Manlai and then we'll have Betsy after that. So, okay, are we ready?
Right, so should I share my screen now, yeah?
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, can you see the screen? Right. Okay, hi everyone. So first of all, thank you for inviting me for this webinar. But before I start, I will give a kind of disclaimer that I am no Buddhist historian, nor do I have all extensive knowledge in Buddhism as a religion. So only thing I did contribute on the topic was when I looked at the Chinese activities in Mongolia, when Mongolia found itself in the middle between the two competing sides, that is Central Tibetan administration against the PRC over the primacy of Tibetan Buddhism. So to start with, so this thing between, I mean, I'm pretty sure everyone is familiar with this dispute between Dalai Lama, this government-in-exile, and against the PRC. So it has been going on for a long time, ever since the Dalai Lama's departure from Tibet. And now, as the Dalai Lama is getting old, I think he turned 85 like a few days ago or so. And this discussion or the succession of who will be the next Dalai Lama or is increasing even more. So now the overall situation we have today is that each of these two sides, the Central Tibetan administration on one hand and the PRC, now hold two high-ranking lamas, one the Dalai Lama and the Panchen Lama, who are equally influential figures in Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And then on top of that, at the moment, the PRC controls the Tibetan Autonomous Region and bulk of Tibetan population, while the Dalai Lama's institution operates in exile from India. So the two sides have their own lines of argumentations, and I will start with the Chinese one. And the Chinese, the narrative goes like this, because it is very historical. So starting from 18th century up until the 20th century, the predecessor of the current Chinese state, the Qing dynasty, has been selecting all of the high-ranking lamas, both in Mongolia and in Tibet. So this tradition, that's a historic fact, and that China, as a successor of Qing, is also seeking to continue this tradition. But from Tibetan point of view, they don't see this argumentation as valid, and and consider the Chinese involvement were only a short and most recent period of Tibetan Buddhist tradition, while the original Tibetan reincarnation process has been going on for thousands of years before that. So as a result, we have today two sides that somehow stuck in a deadlock situation, and this is where the Mongolia comes into place. So, so where does Mongolia fit into the picture? So in 2010, the former president Eg-Uur has granted Mongolian citizenship to the Dalai Lama appointed 9th Jigtsumdam, which can be described as the first steps of initiating this process of reviving Jigtsumdam institutions. So from the two sides and establish its own and more independent Mongolian Buddhist institution. So the second point of Mongolia's motivation on this process is quite is quite consistent among the Mongolian, let's say, patriots or whatever people, and so they seek to somehow assume the central position among Buddhists beyond Mongolian borders, to somehow attract the worshippers from Buryatia, Tuva, and Kalmykia, as well as Inner Mongolia, and even further extending to the followers of the Jonlung school, another sect of Tibetan Buddhism, as the 9th Jigtsumdam was appointed by Dalai Lama as the leader of that particular sect. So anyway, this seems to be the main argumentation on why Mongolia got actively involved in this dispute in the first place. And well, the first reason explains Mongolia's move as a defensive strategy, that it had no other option but to somehow was dragged into this situation, while the second reason seems to be more of a strategic one to elevate Mongolia's international posture. So now we go into the Mongolia's role. So because this the figure of Jigtsumdam in 9th and 10th Jigtsumdam was found and confirmed and revived by Dalai Lama, and which therefore reincarnated outside of this Chinese proposed claims of the golden horn, poses a major challenge to break China's line of thinking, therefore undermining the whole line of argumentation of Chinese claims. But for Dharamsala, for the Tibetan side, having Jigtsumdam on their side is will strengthen their cause going forward, because as it is like somehow surviving, and the future for them looks quite bleak, so to speak. For China, on the other hand, because the Tibetans, China, the revival of Jigtsumdam somehow breaks this the claims of their argumentation. So it leaves no choice for PRC to be actively involved in the selection process in Mongolia. So this is my somehow the argumentation. And then in 2016, when the Dalai Lama visited Mongolia to confirm the 10th Jebsen Damba, it has instigated all around Chinese activities. So, because for China, given its economic leverage in Mongolia, it has been using this leverage against Mongolia every time when Dalai Lama has appeared later. So in a more long-term approach, Chinese state organs, monasteries, and other entities have been very much active, fostering ties with Mongolian clergies, exploiting its division, religious nationalism, and sectarianism. So this includes various measures of funding and other exchanges targeting individual monasteries and Buddhist figures. And among many such instances, one noticeable example that we all know is this Zawa Dending, who openly opposes the Dalai Lama and presents himself as the real Mongolian Lama. So, but Zawa Dending is, however, a prominent shooting figure in Mongolia. So, I'm not sure if you guys know the dart shooting controversy, but given the rumors of this international dart shooting movement involved with the Chinese state organs, the suspicions of Zawa Dending being agent of Chinese interest is not too far off. And then more recently, the campaigns are coming towards the Mongolian public, which I had discovered going through the website of Chinese embassy. So before it was from the immediate economic pressure to somehow long-term approach to influence the various entities in Mongolian Buddhism. Now it's going to directing at the public. And so last year, it is not long ago, last year in 2019, on the 70th years of anniversary between the diplomatic relations between Mongolia and PRC, and as well as the 16th year of anniversary of founding of Tibetan Autonomous Region, the Chinese embassy in Ulaanbaatar has organized a trip to Tibet with a group of Mongolian journalists, academics, as well as columnists. So upon return, the group has tasked to produce several Tibet-themed articles and opinion pieces about the Tibet under Chinese rules, with the title Chinese Tibet in the Eyes of Mongolians. So these end products of articles and opinion pieces have been circulated in various media outlets in Mongolia, and like from news.mn, trends.mn, UB Life, etc., as well as in daily newspapers. And I have picked up several themes. I mean, going through these articles, I have picked up several themes in the contents and the narratives of the content. So first of them is there is this deliberate idea to portray or showcase Tibet free of Dalai Lama. I mean, because the Dalai Lama has become so much iconic, not only towards Buddhist followers, but to regular folks around the world, especially in the West. So it's very difficult to imagine Tibet without Dalai Lama, even though maybe he has been living more time, he has spent more time than India in Tibet. So I think to portray Tibet as its own was somehow an important point for China to convey the message that, you know, Tibet can be, you know, can be perfectly fine without Dalai Lama, maybe even prosperous. Secondly, there's been quite consistent in most of the pieces the narratives of sustainable, the balanced development between tradition and modernity, and lots of writers have mentioned being envious of Tibetan development, drawing comparison to Mongolia, etc. Basically, these were all about how life has been amazing under the Chinese rule. That can't narrative. And lastly, with pieces about Princess Wencheng, which is an object of Chinese propaganda for Sinicization of Tibet, also consistent with overall Chinese narrative to connect and elevate certain periods in history to use as a justification point for the ongoing process and programs. So these are mainly my subjective readings of the context, but one can just go through the Mongolian embassy, Chinese embassy in the Ulaanbaatar website, and just go through it and maybe come up with your own conclusion. So for concluding remarks, I should probably say that these are completely fine way of doing cultural diplomacy, I suppose. And I expect in near future the sheer volume of such, let's say, what can be described as influencing operations will probably stay intact until whatever objectives China can meet with these things. So that comes to the end point of my short presentation. And I will end with this somewhat positive note that given that various meddling or entanglements, the optimal scenario for Mongolia is in reviving Jigzindam is to somehow bring about the Jigzindamba who is neutral and friendly both to Dalai Lama institution as well as the PRC. And the Jigzindamba as the head of the Mongolian Buddhism with the decreased dependence from both two sides, and which will in a way make Mongolia as a Buddhist center among other Mongolian people in Inner Asia, Inner Mongolia, or in Russian parts. So, which is, I think, consistent with this hopeful idea of why the Mongolians decided to go into this dispute in the first place. So I guess this is pretty much everything I wanted to say. And thanks for the attention.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes. Marissa, you have to turn off.
Now I am. Okay. I was muted and then I wasn't, I guess. Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah. So thank you, Manlai. That was really interesting and we have some questions coming in, but we'll save that until after Betsy's talk. I think I should have said earlier, just housekeeping, of course, just a reminder if everyone can make sure that their microphones are turned off. With our Zoom setup, we don't have quite as much control over that. So we're relying on you to mute yourselves. Thank you. Someone is saying in the chat box they don't have sound. I will just continue and I guess we'll work on that. Does someone else say they don't have sound? Or is that limited to that person issue? Okay, someone else said they had sound. So I think I'm just gonna continue. Okay, so yeah, please let us know your questions from online in the chat box and we'll get to those in a few minutes. So yeah, I'm going to turn it over now to Betsy, and Betsy's going to supplement this very high-level geopolitical stuff with some, I think, more grounded anecdotes, which is, I think, going to be a really great combination. So you're on, Betsy.
That was really good. Marissa, thank you so much for having me, and American Center for Mongolian Studies. This is really wonderful. I hope that I have something to add. I am going to talk about my personal experience working in Mongolia, and just to give the audience a little bit of background, and I know that some of you know this quite well, but Mongolian Buddhism in the late 30s there were religious purges, and up to 30,000 monks were were killed. There were 2,000 monasteries in both Inner and Outer Mongolia that were ripped down. I started to work in an area with some fabulous partners, some of which I think are here tonight. Sudeep Chandra, who's a fisheries biologist, and Zeb Hogan. We also worked with a fly fishing company, two actually, one that was owned by a wonderful Mongolian man, his name is Puji, and then one from the United States. We talked to some of the monks who were very involved in translating sutras, which are prayers. And one of the sutras and 99 people suffering. And there was a big poaching problem going on at that point in the area. And it was really poaching that was pressure from outside. It was Chinese, it was Russian. There were Slovenian and Slovakian fly fishing. Actually, they weren't fly fishing. They were coming in with treble hooks and ripping the fish out of the river. And it was a problem, and some of the local people were involved in being guides. And so, you know, we really wanted to look at a particularly how to be most effective in this particular place. I think I came in and thought, oh, well, we're going to do a conservation project, and you know, this is the way we do it in the West. And as I began to spend time with the people there, and I ended up spending a ton of time in the Eg-Uur Valley and began to understand the history of this place. It was the home of the Dayan Derkh Monastery. And the Dayan Derkh Monastery had been one of the monasteries that had been raised. Hospitality is tremendous, and people are so unbelievably the local people, and it was something that they, in spite of the fact that practicing Buddhism had been actually done covertly. It was illegal in schools, you know, Soviet-style schools. Students were taught that religion is superstitious, that it's you know, the antithesis of being intellectual. And so there were a number of people in the valley who had continued to practice their particular beliefs. When the monastery was destroyed, there were a number of people who took relics from the monastery or pieces of the monastery, Buddhist statues, tankas, which are a beautiful, I wish I could show you one. They're cloth, beautiful embroidered depictions of Buddhas and various incarnations, and they had them in their houses, and they would show me them. And I mean, I remember a gorgeous shrine in one of the nomads' houses that was to Green Terra, and it was absolutely exquisite. What I came to learn when we were doing this project, and I said it was initially, it was a conservation project, and the scientists who were there were catching fish and tagging them, Western ideas, but having real dialogue. And some of these Pallas cats were being harvested for eggs so that they could have, you know, I mean, they could essentially have eggs available if there was pressure put on the species in case there was an opportunity for reintroduction at some point. And it was one of the most interesting conversations I'd heard, because there was a great concern about harm to sentient beings harvesting eggs. But the end of the discussion, the monks, and one of the monks was a high monk at the Gondan monastery, said, you know, we understand that this animal's being harmed, but we really think that extinction is the greatest evil. That the extinguishing of a species is something that is gravely troubling to us. And so it was interesting to go back and forth and talk about these issues, and at the same time be very aware of the culture of the area. And one of the things that occurred to me and was very, hold on one second. Sorry, I have a husband here who's doing some stuff in the kitchen. One of the things that I did learn is that this area had a very special syncretism with shamanism. This was an area that Dayan Derkh was a shaman, and the legend was that he stole one of the wives of Genghis Khan, and he was an evil shaman, and he killed people, and so when people went after him, he turned into a stone, and the stone was in a cave above the monastery site. And this cave is remarkable. It's so beautiful. And when I first visited it, it was absolutely, it was decorated with prayer flags and gifts to Dayan Derkh, and these marvelous, I mean, it was a really, it's one of the most amazing places I've ever seen. And Dayan Derkh, according to the legend, converted to Buddhism and became wonderful after that, and gave Genghis Khan his wife back and stopped killing people. And it was really interesting to trace that history, because it was a conversion story. Mongolia has this history of shamanism, and the Buddhists came in and converted to shamans in some of the areas. And this still has a really rich shamanic history. And I found Dayan Derkh in a book that came out in 1969 by a professor at University of Bonn called Walter Herzig, who talked about mountain deities. And this was something that was on his radar screen, as he was the head of Asiatic Studies, which is what it was called, at University of Bonn. And he was aware of Dayan Derkh, and Dayan Derkh had, there are these wonderful prayers that the local people would say to Dayan Derkh, and yet they converted to Buddhism. The thing that I find interesting is when the Buddhist purges happened, I think that people continued to worship Dayan Derkh, and that was able to continue when Buddhism was strictly, really, I mean, regulated the practice of Buddhism. I think that these shamanic ideas continued because this cave continued to be visited, to be festooned with these wonderful things. And so when we built the Dayan Derkh Monastery, the woman who, before we had a monk who was staying there permanently, the woman who was caretaking for it was a shaman. And she felt very, very strongly that she was also a very devout Buddhist. And when the monastery, I believe the ceremony was in 2008 or 2009, a year before, maybe a couple of years before the ceremony, the Buddhist monks from Ulaanbaatar had asked, they'd either ask local people to clean up the ceremonies, and that was wiped out. And again, it seemed like a very modern example of Buddhists wanting to convert shamans and make it more Buddhist. And it was an interesting phenomenon that happened there. And again, the tension between the two still occurs, but it is a syncretism at this point. The monastery continues to do quite well, and I talked to, and it's being managed by Gandon. Gandon continues to have ceremony, or they have a wonderful monk there, Sirinocher, who still practices there. I'm sorry, he caretakes there, but Gandon comes in for various important times during the year. And I was talking to a friend of mine today in the Gobi, and what I had talked to Marissa about in terms of the renaissance of Mongolian Buddhism is that it happens in different ways in different parts of the country. The way that Mongolian Buddhism is construed is so different. My friend worked in the Gobi, he worked in UB, and understanding of Mongolian Buddhism really varies geographically. And so I also just quickly want to say that it was a fantastic project working with some of the most wonderful people I've ever gotten to work with. And I see that some of them are here tonight, and that really makes me happy. And I'm happy to take any questions. And I know that was short. There's so much more that I could talk about. And again, but I just wanted to give you a small snapshot of what we were doing.
Yeah. Thank you, Betsy. That was really interesting. It's like really amazing to get that really fine-grained detail as well. And I think it also spoke to Ganden as well, which of course Manlai was also speaking about, and some of the concerns that Manlai was speaking about Mongolian Buddhism and its fragmentation.
It's very different depending on where you are. And I have to say, I have unbelievably dear friends at Ganden as well. It's but depending on where you are, Ganden or Erdenzu, or it's different. Each of these little, not little, but it manifests itself very differently depending where you are in Mongolia.
Yeah, which has also been my experience. Yeah. So yeah, I think I saw one question pop up. I don't know if they had just directly sent that to me. I don't see it now. And then we had a few questions left on the webpage, on the ACMS webpage from beforehand. So I think I'll just start with that. Actually, there's a really good one. I'm gonna start with one there's one that's good for Manlai I saw, and one that's good for Betsy. So I think I'll actually ask the one of Manlai first. But yeah, also if either of you have something to say and you want to respond, totally do that. Or if you do, would you guys like to respond to each other's talks, or should I give Manlai a chance to say something?
I thought it was a fabulous talk. It was so interesting, and it's something. I will say that I got to meet His Holiness when he came to Mongolia, and these were the issues that were very much in the mind of Amgalan, who is the Hamba Lama, who you showed a picture of, and so I found it incredibly interesting, and it's a tension that's been going on for as you know, quite a while.
Yeah, Manlai, did you have anything you wanted to
because because I'm not so familiar with the situation in Mongolia. I just only do the desktop research on the, let's say, the bigger geopolitical topics. So I do not have any insights on that.
Okay. Yeah, so I did see a question pop up that was, what country will the new Dalai Lama be born in? I don't know if you wanted to respond to that, and I sort of raised that just because I think that is something that comes up. Not that you have to answer the question, but if you want to respond to that.
I don't have an answer. Obviously, I don't have an answer. But I think there was this kind of idea in Mongolia that for some reason the next Dalai Lama is one of the destination of next Dalai Lama is going to be Mongolia, but I don't know how come they got this idea. Like the given information or the given the current situation, I think it will be it's going to be either on the Dalai Lamas or the Central Tibetan administration's domain or the Chinese domain. Mm-hmm. So I think Chinese will, from the Chinese side, they will probably propose someone for the Dalai Lama. So there will be, the question would be how many Dalai Lamas there will be. There could be like 2 Dalai Lamas. So I don't know. But I don't think there will be this idea of Dalai Lama reincarnated Mongolia is, I don't think that's a very plausible thing.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So so the question I saw on the website that I wanted to kind of pose. So Christina Telecki, who I think some people may be familiar with, she headed up a really interesting project a few years ago called the Monastery Mapping Project, which I think should still be online, but it's a very, very cool project, and you can get lots of oral history, essentially, from a lot of monks living in different areas of Mongolia. And she was asking about this issue of local Mongolian monasteries, small monasteries, that have sent students to Tibet, or to India, to study in the Tibetan Buddhist monasteries there. But then they have the issue of these students need now to come back to Mongolia, and the monasteries are having issues raising funds to house and school, basically to grow the infrastructure of their monastery to house these monks. Is that something you guys can speak to? I know that just working in internet between like 2008 and 2012, the size of the monastery like quadrupled. Like, I mean, I have a picture where you can compare, like, the size of the monastery, it multiplied, and I don't know where they got the funds for that. But yeah, I don't know. This is also something that people in anthropology of Tibetan Buddhism of Tibet talk about a lot, is how these monasteries get international funding, essentially. I don't know if that's something people would want to comment about.
I can just a little bit. Number one, I was just talking about this mapping project today with a friend of mine, Kanchog Norbu, who is a monk who I met in Mongolia, who spent a number of years there. And we were talking about actually a little, sort of touching on what you're saying in terms of how Mongolian Buddhism is coming back. And we were both sort of saying, Tibet was able to have the Tibetan, Tibetan Buddhism in exile in India, and Mongolia didn't have that. There was no refuge, and so when it's gonna come back it's gonna take a couple of generations. I mean, I think it's doing Mongolia is doing an amazing job right now, and there's so much vibrancy in the Buddhist community. But this particular issue is going to be one that's going to be difficult because you will have Mongolian students who need to go into these places that have had Buddhism that has been flourishing and thriving continually. The Dayan Derkh Monastery was funded by a really the fly fishers, the international anglers who came in to fly fish in the area, funded the building of the Dayan Derkh Monastery, and they also funded a number of scholarships for local students to go to, and they went to Gondan to study Buddhism. So I did find that there was interest on the part of the international community, but I don't think it's going to be easy because fundraising's never easy. But I think it's really important, and I think it's a really good question. And I hope as Mongolian Buddhism makes itself it's so unique, and I think that there needs to continue to be, on the part of Mongolian and Mongolian practitioners, a real distinction between Mongolian Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism or other forms of Buddhism, because it is such a special version. And I hope that international funders recognize that this is a tradition that really needs its own channel of funding.
Yeah, and I mean, that's also a concern, I think, of, I know people who are Buryatian, sort of Buryatian Buddhism as well, have been concerned as well about that, kind of drawing that distinction between these different kinds of Vajrayana Buddhism, or whatever the term needs to be, right? Yeah, interesting. Manlai, did you have anything?
Yeah, I have a question actually. Because you have mentioned these monastery mapping projects, and there seems to be the growing number of monasteries at this point, right? And I'm just curious, how do these smaller monasteries coordinate? How do they make decisions? Do they act independently, or is there some kind of central?
Yeah, I was curious about Betsy's case because it sounded like at the same time they were getting this like kind of sound like maybe unconventional source of like time and fishery support from an international support, but they also apparently were very connected with Gondan, maybe not at first, but maybe later. Or so I was curious about that from Betsy. What I've seen in Erdenet is you have the Hambalam came for certain ceremonies, but I wasn't sure how close of a relationship there was. And then sometimes local people would not go to that monastery; they would go to Amrbayaskalant instead. But anyway, I'll let Betsy talk because I had the same question for you.
No, and I think I mean, my answer would be it really depends. You know, I talked to my friend today, and I'm going to just, if I can read what he was, I can't find the name of the monastery, but it's in the East Gobi, and it's very, very famous. And
Hamrinheed?
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
And it's one that should come off the tip of my tongue, and I apologize that it didn't. But that is, they make their own decisions. They are not affiliated with Gondan or any of these larger monasteries. Dayan Derkh was the agreement was that Dayan Derkh would be shepherded by Gondan, but it's very much managed by a local monk. As I said, his name is Siran Ocher, and he's really fabulous. And the local community uses it with some regularity. I mean, there are when we were there were any number of ceremonies. There were local women getting together, having sewing circles. There were, there were contests in wrestling, and I mean, they had celebrations there, and it didn't seem like there was. The Gondan didn't manage it on a day-to-day basis.
Okay.
But I think that's a really excellent question. And I would go back and say it depends, because I think that there are a lot of little monasteries that are independent, but there are also some that are very much under the wing of some of the larger monasteries. And I say some of the larger monasteries, there are 3 large monasteries.
Right. So I asked that question because these are, I think, the main reasons why not like the smaller monasteries, but in general, all of the monasteries in Mongolia, they somehow act independently, not so well coordinated with each other. So this is also one of the reasons why it gets targeted by, for example, for this instance, from the Chinese funding or whatever, different other funding. So, which can shift their, the way of activities in a way. So their stance, for example, the stance towards, for example, Dalai Lama, or the stance towards, or this newly revived Egyptian, etc., etc. So, I mean, I always try to see Mongolian Buddhism to somehow in comparison with the Catholic Church. I mean, maybe it's a very stupid comparison, but because at least I think the community, the Mongolian communities, the higher lamas, they're trying to somehow go to this kind of direction. Even Tibet, I think, they go into that kind of direction, more organized, more coordinated. So, yeah, but right now in Mongolia, it seems like everything is somehow not so coordinated, dispersed to, just everyone's acts independently on their own.
Well, and it's really interesting that I didn't know anything about, except from your blog post and your presentation, that there had been this kind of the same messaging that I understand that the Chinese public gets about Tibet is now being directly being put directly to the Mongolian public, right? That's like very significant, and not something I had heard before. And yeah, I think something to pay attention to. Yeah, we actually had Christina say in the chat that she's here, and thank you very much to both of you guys. So that's awesome. I'm glad she was here. And so we had someone asked 3 questions. I was just gonna maybe. So I think it might be important to kind of clarify. They asked about the current Jebsung Damba, and my understanding, correct, is that the current Jebsung Damba is a child, and the only person who knows who that is the Dalai Lama, right? And the Dalai Lama has not yet revealed him, and that was the sort of last statement on that from the Dalai Lama, and it's just kind of, that's sort of the current state of the Jebsung Dhamma institution, or?
Yeah, I mean, now I think the Dalai Lama somehow confirmed the kid, the infant, the child now, and I guess I believe the certain individuals in the Mongolian Buddhist circles, they probably know about who the person is, but now they somehow keeping it somewhat, let's say, secrecy. Yeah, and therefore he has, let's say, virtually no influence or whatever on the Mongolian Buddhists at the moment, but I guess it will change in the near future.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Okay, so it looks like we're about out of time, so I think I'll take one more question. And some people are starting to head out, but they're saying thanks for this talk. Okay, yeah, so final question. May I ask about current Buddhist practice, which is leaning more towards commercial side, like providing chanting over the phone for busy people? I haven't heard of that. Another question, I think it's related, about monks' general education quality here in the country, such as giving them skills to integrate back to current life if they decide to leave spiritual path. Okay, so they're saying in general they're interested in what's the influence of sort of modernity or modern lifestyle, as they put it, on Buddhist practice.
I have a little, so first of all, I think that one of the questions is from one of my best friends, Chimge, who she worked with me. Well, she was our person in Mongolia. She was the one. Dayan Derkh Monastery would never have happened if it wasn't for Chimge, and I love her dearly. And she has a very interesting take on Buddhism and really helped me understand Mongolian Buddhism in terms of the way it is now being understood by people in UB. And it is very different in UB than it is in some of these other places. That said, it is very commercial. There are people who kind of set up shop where they have a menu of various things, good fortune, have a boy, whatever, may your herds will get bigger, depending on what you want the particular Buddhist practitioner to pray for or to do a ceremony about. And I think that there is a risk of having charlatans and people who are making money and that are not genuinely practicing Buddhism in a way. But I would also go back and say Buddhism in Mongolia is still kind of defining itself. And so, there are legitimate ceremonies for good fortune. And one of the things that came out of this paper that I read, that Rebecca Waters did, and this is a volume that Marissa is editing, is that sometimes when one asks for good fortune, it's not just good fortune for them personally, it's good fortune that they put back out in the world. So it's complicated, Chimge. I do think that there are people who are taking advantage of this monetarily, but I also think that there's gray areas, I guess is what I would say. And Manlai, you might have a different take.
Well, I do not have any comment on that. Because, like I said, it's also comes into the organizational part of Mongolian Buddhism, right? Because there is no definite source of funding or an income. So, I mean, the monks, they have to, they also eat, they also live, right? They have to find some kind of source of income. So that's why there's different kinds of stuff is going on. The different fundings or whatever, or the Buddhism is turning into some kind of business.
I think that's a really good point.
Right. So, I
yeah,
mean,
we have.
In other countries, like the Christian countries, you have this organized tax collection, for example, or I don't know. But it doesn't. In Mongolia, they don't have any kind of some kind of funding scheme. So maybe that's the main problem I find.
Yeah, and I think that absolutely is fair. I think that there does need to be opportunities for monks to be able to, eat and live and take care of themselves, and so there's a fine line, and I think Julie says it too, that there are people there's commercial activity, but there also is the need for monks to take care of themselves. And I think that's an excellent point.
And it's also not, she points out, it's not just at like the individual level of individuals going and having that engagement with monks, but it's like construction companies, and I've also read about mining companies, paying monks and things like that. So I know that's also concern people have. So yeah. Okay. Well, I think it's time to wrap up. Did you guys have any final concluding statements?
Thank you for having us. It's been a real pleasure, and really good questions and wonderful co-speakers.
Yeah, thank you both.
Thank you both too.
And thank you, American Center for Mongolian Studies.
Yes, definitely. Yes, thank you to so Natso, of course, and Ghana at American Center for Mongolian Studies are running all of the Zoom stuff for us, and they will be putting up a recording of this very soon. And right now we're organizing our next panel, so hopefully we will be announcing that one in the next week and a half or so. So hopefully see everyone there.
Bye, everybody. Stay safe.
Yes.